Chapter 1: A Disquieting Summons. The gas lamp outside cast a watery, indistinct glow through the grime-streaked window of 221B, Baker Street, painting the familiar room in shades of sepia and shadow. A persistent, chill drizzle, characteristic of a London autumn, pattered against the panes, lending an air of profound domesticity to our chambers. I, Dr. John H. Watson, was ensconced in my armchair, a stout volume on tropical fevers propped open on my knee, the steady ticking of the mantelpiece clock a comforting counterpoint to the quiet industry of my friend. Sherlock Holmes, oblivious to the mundane world, was hunched over his chemical apparatus at the corner table, a faint but acrid odor of carbolic acid mingling with the scent of his ever-present shag tobacco. His long, thin fingers, stained with iodine, deftly manipulated a retort, his sharp profile illuminated by the flickering flame beneath. He seemed a figure drawn from some esoteric medieval laboratory, lost in pursuits unfathomable to the ordinary mind. Our tranquil evening, however, was destined for abrupt termination. A sharp, insistent rap echoed through the floorboards, quickly followed by the clatter of our landlady, Mrs. Hudson, ascending the stairs. Before her customary knock, the door burst open with a suddenness that startled me, causing my medical treatise to slide unceremoniously to the floor. Standing on our threshold was a figure of manifest distress, his normally impeccable attire now dishevelled, his face a mask of profound anxiety. It was Sir Reginald Ashworth, a baronet of considerable acreage in Kent, whose occasional visits to London brought him, more often than not, to consult my friend on matters of ancient lineage or curious historical artifacts. Tonight, however, his bearing was entirely devoid of his usual patrician composure. His eyes, usually shrewd and commanding, darted nervously about the room, wide with a fear that transcended mere inconvenience. "Holmes! Watson! Thank God I found you in," he gasped, his voice hoarse, as Mrs. Hudson, flustered, stepped aside to allow him full entry. "A dreadful calamity! An impossible theft! I hardly know where to begin." Holmes, without so much as turning his head from his experiment, raised a hand in a gesture of calm authority. "Pray, Sir Reginald, compose yourself. Your hurried arrival and agitated state suggest a matter of some urgency, but hysteria rarely clarifies the facts. A chair, Watson, if you please." I hastily righted a nearby armchair, and Sir Reginald, with a sigh that seemed to emanate from the very depths of his soul, collapsed into it. His hands trembled as he raked them through his thinning grey hair. "It is the Star of the South," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Vanished! Utterly and completely gone from Ashworth Manor. From my study." I felt a familiar thrill course through me. The Star of the South was no mere trinket. It was a sapphire of legendary size and brilliance, an heirloom of the Ashworth line for generations, famed not only for its immense value but for its intricate history, having once graced the crown of an Indian potentate. "Indeed," Holmes murmured, a subtle shift now perceptible in his posture, a barely discernible tightening of his lean frame. He still did not look at our client, but his ear was clearly attuned to every word. "And when, pray tell, did this remarkable disappearance occur?" "This very morning, Holmes," Sir Reginald exclaimed, regaining a fraction of his lost vigour. "I retired last night, as is my custom, after placing the jewel back into its secure display cabinet in my study. The door to the study was locked from within, the key in my possession. The windows, Holmes, are barred, as you know, and those I inspected myself before leaving the room. This morning, upon entering, the room was precisely as I had left it. No sign of forced entry, no disturbed dust, not a single telltale mark on the lock or the window latches. Yet, the cabinet stood empty. That star of the South, gone. He threw his hands up in a gesture of utter defeat. It is impossible, Holmes. Absolutely impossible. The room was secured from the inside, by my own hand. I am the only one with the key. How could it have vanished? Holmes slowly turned from his experiments, his gaunt face, usually impassive, now alight with a keen, almost predatory interest. His grey eyes, which had moments before been fixed on boiling chemicals, now pierced Sir Reginald with an intensity that seemed to strip away all pretense. Impossible, you say, Sir Reginald? Holmes pronounced, his voice low and musical. A fascinating adjective, indeed. And one that rarely withstands close scrutiny. Tell me, what measures have you taken? Has the local constabulary been informed? Only that a theft has occurred, nothing more, no details, Sir Reginald stammered. I deemed it best to consult you first. This requires a more delicate hand, a more discerning eye than that of Inspector Davies, bless his well-meaning heart. Holmes regarded him for a long moment, a faint smile playing on his lips. He wiped his hands on a nearby cloth, extinguishing the burner beneath his retort. The air seemed to crackle with anticipation. Then, Sir Reginald, he said, rising to his full height, it appears we have no time to lose. Watson, fetch your travelling case. It seems the fog of London must yield to the mists of Kent. The impossible often proves to be merely the improbable, seen through an incomplete lens. And that star of the South will not, I trust, remain a missing star for long. My heart quickened. Another case, another journey into the intricate labyrinth of human folly and ingenuity. And with Holmes's quiet pronouncement, the mundane worries of tropical fevers and city drizzle receded, replaced by the thrilling prospect of adventure. Chapter 2: The Journey to Kent. The following morning found us ensconced in a first-class carriage rattling southeastwards, leaving the smoky embrace of London for the verdant undulations of Kent. The persistent drizzle of the previous night had given way to a watery sun, struggling valiantly to pierce the lingering mist that clung to the fields and hedgerows. Holmes, ever the connoisseur of comfort during travel, had secured us a compartment where he could stretch his long frame and dedicate himself to the morning papers, though I suspected his mind was already miles ahead, sifting through the meagre facts provided by Sir Reginald. For my part, I found myself reflecting upon our client. His profound distress, coupled with his rather swift recovery of composure once Holmes had accepted the case, was a curious study in human nature. It was precisely this subtle shift that Holmes had remarked upon as we packed our bags, noting the precise moment Sir Reginald's despair transitioned into a faint, almost imperceptible, flicker of hope. The man is deeply attached to the gem, Watson, as one might be to an ancestor, Holmes had observed, but even more so to his reputation. The impossible nature of the theft, while deeply troubling, also provides him a curious shield from immediate blame or suspicion. An ordinary theft would point fingers at lax security, but a locked room mystery elevates it to something grander, more theatrical. Holmes himself broke the comfortable silence of our journey, his gaze fixed on the fleeting landscape outside. "It is a common failing, Watson," he mused, without turning, "to complicate where simplicity reigns. To search for the intricate when the obvious stands boldly before us." Sir Reginald, a man of method and tradition, sees a problem entirely within human parameters, because his world is one of human artifice and human failing. He has overlooked, I suspect, the less conventional actors on the stage. He fell silent once more, leaving me to ponder the cryptic remark. Less conventional actors? My mind wrestled with this, conjuring images of phantom thieves or perhaps some exotic, undiscovered mechanism, but I knew better than to press Holmes when he was in such a contemplative mood. His pronouncements, however veiled, often contained the seeds of his later, brilliant expositions. The countryside grew wilder as we progressed, the neatly hedged fields giving way to ancient woodlands, their boughs heavy with autumn leaves, creating tunnels of shadow as the train rushed past. By the time we disembarked at the small, sleepy station of Ashcombe, a sense of profound isolation had begun to settle upon me. Sir Reginald had sent a carriage to meet us, a venerable, if somewhat worn, conveyance drawn by two sturdy greys. The drive to Ashworth Manor was lengthy and winding, taking us through narrow lanes canopied by towering oaks and beeches. The manor itself emerged from the swirling mists like a relic of a bygone age. It was a formidable structure of grey stone, its facade softened by centuries of clinging ivy, its mullioned windows staring out like ancient, unblinking eyes. The surrounding woods, dense and dark, pressed in upon the estate, lending it an air of melancholic grandeur, a place where time seemed to move at a slower, more deliberate pace. Upon our arrival, we were met at the imposing oak door by a stern-faced woman of middle age, Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper, whose ramrod posture and tightly drawn bun spoke of years of unquestioning service. Her greeting was formal, though her eyes, quick and appraising, betrayed a certain agitated curiosity. Behind her stood a slender, immaculately dressed gentleman, Mr. Finch, the estate manager. His air was one of meticulous correctness, almost to the point of rigidity, and he offered us a precise, if somewhat detached, welcome. A palpable tension hung in the air, a silent apprehension that permeated every corridor and drawing room. The hushed efficiency of the staff, their averted glances, the very stillness of the ancient house, all spoke of an event that had shattered the customary peace. It was clear that the disappearance of the Star of the South had not merely removed a jewel, it had cast a long, unsettling shadow over Ashworth Manor, a shadow thick with unspoken suspicions and a pervasive sense of disquiet. We had arrived not merely at a house, but at a puzzle wrapped in a riddle, shrouded in the atmosphere of a brewing storm. Chapter 3: The Vanishing Star. Our introductions concluded with the unnerving precision of a formal obituary. Mr. Finch, with a curt, almost military gesture, led us directly to the scene of the purported crime. "The study, gentlemen," he announced, his voice devoid of emotion, "is here. Sir Reginald awaits your inspection within." He opened a massive, iron-bound oak door, its surface bearing the patina of centuries. The room beyond was a cavern of academic grandeur, a testament to generations of Ashworth erudition and affluence. Heavy oak paneling climbed the walls to a ceiling adorned with intricate plasterwork, all cloaked in the somber shadows cast by the leaded glass of the tall, narrow windows. These windows, I noted immediately, were indeed protected by stout iron bars, as Sir Reginald had described, fixed securely into the stone. The air was cool and stagnant, carrying the faint, aged scents of leather, old paper, and beeswax polish. Antique furniture, carved from dark, formidable woods, stood sentinel around the room, a vast partner's desk laden with scholarly tomes, several deeply upholstered armchairs, and, dominating one wall, the magnificent display cabinet. It was a formidable piece, crafted from a wood so dark it seemed to absorb the meager light, its glass panels thick and gleaming despite the gloom. Before it, Sir Reginald stood, his hands clasped behind his back, his brow furrowed in a perpetual state of bewildered exasperation. "Gentlemen," he greeted us, a note of strained dignity in his tone. "I trust your journey was agreeable. The spectacle before you is anything but." He gestured towards the cabinet, its central compartment, where the Star of the South should have rested on a velvet cushion, now conspicuously vacant. "I can only reiterate what I told you last night, Holmes," Sir Reginald continued, his voice recovering some of its natural timbre as he recounted the events. "I spent a quiet evening in here, finalizing some correspondence. The sapphire, as always, was locked within this cabinet." He tapped a thick, gloved finger against the glass. "Before retiring, I personally checked the door, locked it from the inside, and satisfied myself that the window latches were secure. I then took the key to my bedchamber, as is my unwavering habit. This morning, upon my return, everything appeared exactly as I had left it. The door was still locked, the windows undisturbed. Yet, when I opened the cabinet..." He trailed off, shaking his head slowly, a picture of profound bafflement. Holmes, who had stood silently by the threshold, allowing Sir Reginald to complete his narrative, now began his methodical examination. He moved with a quiet intensity, his gaze sweeping over every surface, every shadow. He did not touch anything immediately, but rather absorbed the scene with his remarkable, all-encompassing vision. His first point of focus was the heavy oak door. He bent low, scrutinizing the keyhole, running a gloved finger along the ornate brass of the lock mechanism. He then knelt, examining the space between the door and the frame, and finally, the polished floorboards for any telltale scuff marks or minute disturbances that might indicate clandestine entry. He found none. Next, his attention shifted to the barred windows. He tested each latch, peering closely at the aged paintwork and the mortar surrounding the iron bars, looking for any sign of levering or tampering. Again, nothing. The exterior, visible through the glass, showed only the dense foliage of a massive ancient oak. He then approached the display cabinet itself. He circled it slowly, his eyes dissecting its construction, its sturdy plinth, the quality of its wooden glass. He reached out, not to the empty space, but to the intricate brass hinges and the formidable lock that secured its twin doors. He tested the mechanism, working the small, finely wrought key Sir Reginald provided, feeling its resistance, its smooth operation. He then ran his fingers along the edges of the glass panes, his head slightly cocked as if listening to their silent testimony. I watched, notebook in hand, observing his movements with a fascination that never waned. He moved towards the large, stone fireplace, its mantelpiece adorned with heavy, unlit candelabra. Here, his movements paused. He leaned in, his keen eyes fixed on the sooty interior, then his fingers lightly brushed against the mantelpiece. He picked up what appeared to be a minute, almost invisible, flake of soot, rolling it between his thumb and forefinger for a moment before letting it fall. His gaze then drifted upwards, sweeping along the ornate ceiling. His eyes seemed to fix upon a point near the cornice, directly above the fireplace. He stood on a chair, stretching his long arm, his fingers lightly tracing an almost imperceptible mark, a faint, shallow scratch, no more than an inch long, against the pale plasterwork. It was so high up, and so minor, that I would never have noticed it. Returning to the floor, Holmes slowly surveyed the room once more, his hands tucked behind his back. The absolute stillness of the room, now that Sir Reginald had concluded his account, was striking. It was not merely the silence of an uninhabited chamber, but a heavier, almost oppressive quiet, as though the very air held its breath, guarding its secret. It was a peculiar detail, one that contributed to the uncanny sense of the impossible that Sir Reginald had so emphatically declared. Holmes, however, merely nodded, a flicker of something resembling satisfaction in his eyes. He had found something, though what, I could not yet discern. Chapter 4: The Manor's Secrets. Having concluded his initial survey of the study, Holmes retreated to the adjoining drawing-room, a space perhaps less stiflingly formal than the study, but still permeated by the pervasive, almost suffocating, sense of apprehension that hung over Ashworth Manor. Sir Reginald, though still visibly troubled, had regained a measure of his aristocratic calm, undoubtedly reassured by Holmes's silent, methodical scrutiny. I, for my part, sharpened my pencil and prepared my notebook, ever ready to document the subtle currents of human testimony that Holmes so deftly navigated. Now, Sir Reginald, Holmes began, settling into a deep velvet armchair, if you would be so kind as to have your household staff presented to us, one at a time. The larger the tapestry, the more threads it requires, and no thread, however seemingly insignificant, should be overlooked. Our first interviewee was Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper. She entered with a stiff, almost rigid bearing, her hands clasped tightly before her apron. Her answers were precise, her loyalty to the Ashworth family seemingly absolute. She confirmed Sir Reginald's habits, the routines of the manor, and the general lack of strangers in the vicinity. A most quiet house, sir, she stated, her voice as starched as her collar. Rarely a soul passes the gates unless expected. And as for the security of the manor, Sir Reginald is most particular. Locks are checked, windows secured, and I myself oversee the closing of all downstairs shutters each evening. Holmes listened with his eyes half closed, occasionally interjecting a seemingly innocuous question. And have you, Mrs. Gable, noticed anything out of the ordinary in the days leading up to this incident? Any peculiar sounds, perhaps, or unusual occurrences? She hesitated, her gaze flicking nervously towards the ceiling. Well, sir, if you must know, there have been some noises. For the past week or so, just at dusk, and again in the early hours before dawn. A scratching, rather, and a sort of fluttering, from the roof directly above Sir Reginald's study. I put it down to the wind, or perhaps some nesting pigeons, but it has been quite persistent. She clearly wished to dismiss it, yet the admission hung in the air, a small, dark cloud. Indeed, Holmes said, his eyes now fully open, a glint of interest within their depths. Thank you, Mrs. Gable. That will be all for now. Next came Mr. Finch, the estate manager. He entered with an air of studied efficiency, carrying a small leather-bound ledger. He spoke with an almost professional detachment, detailing the manor's security systems, the various alarm bells, though none had rung, and the robustness of the display cabinet's construction. The cabinet, Mr. Holmes, is a masterpiece of secure craftsmanship, he declared, tapping his ledger. Imported from Germany, with a double locking mechanism and reinforced glass panels. Even if one were to gain entry to the study, to breach that cabinet without considerable noise and specialized tools would be, I assure you, an impossibility. His emphasis on the cabinet's impregnability was almost defensive, as if he felt personally responsible for its failure. He spoke at length about the thoroughness of his nightly rounds and the training of the manor's watchman, ensuring us that no human intruder could have possibly bypassed his meticulous arrangements. Holmes merely nodded, letting the man speak, observing more than listening. "Thank you, Mr. Finch. I may have further questions for you later, particularly regarding the internal structure of the study's fireplace and roof access." As Mr. Finch departed, a timid knock announced our final witness, a young scullery maid, no older than 15, her hands chapped and her eyes downcast. She clutched a small, crumpled handkerchief. Her name, she whispered, was Polly. She was clearly terrified, but Holmes's gentle tone soon put her a little at ease. "Tell me, Polly," he said, "do you often have duties near Sir Reginald's study?" "Why, yes, sir," she stammered. "I sweep the corridor outside it each morning, and sometimes carry coals for the fire in the drawing-room." "And in your work, have you ever noticed anything unusual outside the study windows? Perhaps something frequently seen there?" Polly twisted her handkerchief. "There's a big, black bird, sir," she mumbled, almost apologetically. "A rook, I think. It often sits on the window ledge outside the study, or on the chimney pot. It's a bold one, it is. Always watching." She shivered slightly. "Sometimes, it taps at the glass with its beak, like it's trying to get in." A strange flicker passed across Holmes's face, a barely perceptible tightening around his eyes that I had learned to recognize as the spark of a new, compelling idea. He thanked the girl warmly, dismissing her with a reassuring word. Watson, dutifully, recorded every detail, Mrs. Gable's scratching noises, Mr. Finch's insistent rhetoric about impregnable security, and now, the persistent rook. The juxtaposition was striking, and I could feel the pieces of a most unconventional puzzle beginning to shift in Holmes's mind. "Watson," Holmes finally said, rising and walking towards the study door. "It appears our investigation must now take a less conventional path. Sir Reginald, I must impose upon your hospitality further. I require immediate access to the manor's roof, specifically above the study. And I should very much like to inspect the interior of the study's chimney flue." His voice carried a new, almost eager edge. "I have a theory, Watson, and it involves a most unlikely culprit." Chapter 5: The Feathered Clue and False Leads. With Holmes's unexpected request for access to the manor's roof and chimney, a flurry of activity, unusual for the sedate Ashworth manor, ensued. Sir Reginald, although puzzled, was too keen for a resolution to raise objection, and soon a stout ladder was procured, its rungs groaning under Holmes's lithe weight. I followed, rather more ponderously, my medical bag clutched tightly, for one never knew when a broken ankle or a sudden bout of vertigo might require my services. The roof of Ashworth Manor presented a desolate panorama of moss-covered slate and ancient chimney pots. The wind, now unfettered by walls, tugged at our coats. Holmes, seemingly immune to the blustery conditions, immediately directed his attention to the area directly above the study. His keen eyes, like a hawk scanning its prey, rapidly pinpointed several loose tiles surrounding the broad, squat chimney that served the study's fireplace. "Observe, Watson," he said, gesturing with a long finger. "These tiles are not merely displaced by age or storm. There is a pattern here, a minor but definite disturbance. And look within the flue itself." I peered into the dark, soot-encrusted aperture. The chimney was indeed remarkably wide, far more so than a modern flue, a relic of an age less concerned with fuel efficiency than with grand, open hearths. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I discerned a cluster of dark, rather coarse feathers clinging to the rough stone. And then, at the very edge, glinting faintly in the weak sunlight, a few minute, iridescent fragments. They were not, to my disappointment, pieces of sapphire, but rather fragments of polished glass, perhaps, or some other shiny, discarded bauble. "Just as I suspected," Holmes murmured, a note of triumph in his voice. He extracted a few of the feathers with his tweezers, placing them carefully into a small, stoppered vial from his case. "That scratching noises Mrs. Gable described, the maid's bold bird, the pieces coalesce, Watson." Our descent was interrupted by the unexpected arrival of the local constabulary. Constable Davies, a burly man with a florid face and an air of self-importance that far outweighed his actual acumen, strode into the manor's courtyard, accompanied by a younger, equally earnest deputy. He had clearly, and rather prematurely, made up his mind about the nature of the crime. "Ah, Sir Reginald," he boomed, spotting our client. "I've been going over the particulars. Locked door, no forced entry, family heirloom, clear as day. This is an inside job, plain and simple. Been interrogating the scullery maid, young Polly, bless her heart. Seems a bit shifty, always looking down. And what about that footman, Thomas? Had a gambling debt last year, didn't he?" Holmes, standing unobtrusively by a stone pillar, observed the constable's bluster with a mixture of amusement and thinly veiled impatience. Davies, quite oblivious to the true intellect standing before him, launched into a series of interviews with the terrified staff, meticulously listing their alibis, their financial histories, and their general temperament. Every nervous glance, every stammered answer, was, to the constable's mind, a fresh piece of evidence pointing towards a human culprit within the manor walls. He was, with admirable zeal, constructing an elaborate edifice of suspicion based on the flimsiest of human failings, inadvertently creating a dozen red herrings. Holmes, however, allowed him his theatre. My friend merely exchanged a glance with me, a flicker of his usual ironic humor in his eyes. He knew that Davies's investigations, while distracting, would ultimately prove fruitless in this peculiar instance. The absolute absence of any conventional sign of human intrusion, no jimmy marks, no forced locks, no footprints where there ought to be, no discarded tools, had long since convinced Holmes that the standard inside job scenario was a complete misdirection. "The good constable, Watson," Holmes remarked softly to me, as Davies led a weeping parlour maid away for further questioning, "is suffering from an acute case of anthropocentric bias. He measures all motives by human scale, and all means by human agency. He cannot conceive of a thief without hands, without cunning, without vice. Yet, the evidence we have gathered points to an entirely different species of perpetrator, one guided not by greed, but by instinct and a peculiar fascination with glittering trifles. The cluster of dark feathers from the chimney, the minute iridescent fragments, which, upon closer inspection through Holmes's magnifying glass, appeared to be tiny shards of broken glass, perhaps from a discarded bottle or a mirror, and most significantly, Polly's consistent sightings of the bold rook at the study window and on the chimney pot. These were the threads that Holmes was now weaving into a pattern that, while preposterous to the uninitiated, began to make startling sense in the light of his unique deductive process. My friend was not seeking a human criminal, but rather a feathered one. And a most unconventional culprit indeed. Chapter 6: The Unseen Imperfection. The afternoon sun, now a pale, watery disk in the overcast sky, cast long, distorted shadows across the grand hall as Holmes and I returned to the study, leaving Constable Davies to his bustling, if ultimately misguided, interrogations of the household staff. The air within the manor still hummed with a nervous energy, but Holmes carried himself with a renewed sense of purpose, his earlier amusement at the constable's expense having given way to a focused intensity. "The study, Watson," Holmes declared, stepping across the threshold once more, his eyes immediately drawn to the silent, accusing presence of the display cabinet. "The solution, my dear fellow, often lies not in what is conspicuously absent, but in what is subtly amiss. Everyone, including Sir Reginald, has focused on the impregnability of the room itself. But what of the vessel that held the treasure?" He approached the cabinet slowly, a connoisseur appreciating a work of art, yet with the meticulous eye of a craftsman searching for a flaw. He ran his long, sensitive fingers along the gleaming surface of the dark wood, tracing the lines where glass met timber, where pane joined pane. I watched, fascinated, as he moved with an almost hypnotic grace, his head occasionally tilted, his breath held. Then, his movement ceased. His finger paused, not on the lock, which we knew to be sound, nor on the main frame, which appeared robust. His touch lingered on the very edge of one of the glass panels, precisely where it met the wooden frame that encased the empty velvet cushion. He leaned in, his monocle held to his eye, magnifying the area. "Ah, Watson," he murmured, a note of quiet satisfaction in his voice. "Here we have it. The imperfection that unravels that impossible dot." I stepped closer, straining to see. It was almost invisible to the naked eye, a minuscule, hairline gap, perhaps no wider than the thickness of a thread, between the edge of the glass and the inner lip of the wooden frame. It was a manufacturing fault, perhaps, or a slight warping of the aged timber, or even the subtle shrinkage of the wood over the decades, creating a chink in its formidable armor. Just large enough, I realized with a start, for something small and pointed to reach through. Holmes straightened up, his face now alight with the triumphant gleam of pure deduction. "Consider, Watson, the wide, unrestrained aperture of the chimney flue. Consider the presence of the feathers and soot within. Recall the scullery maid's testimony of a bold rook frequently perching on the study window ledge and chimney pot, even tapping at the glass with its beak. And now, consider this." He tapped the minute gap with his finger. "A corvid, Watson," he articulated, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "a rook, a creature of remarkable intelligence and an insatiable curiosity for all things bright and glittering. It enters the chimney, perhaps drawn by the warmth, or merely by instinct. It finds its way into the study, unnoticed in the dark, still hours of the night. Its eye is caught by the shimmering star of the south. It attempts to tap at the glass, as Polly described, and its keen, dexterous beak discovers this tiny, unseen imperfection. With persistent, intelligent manipulation, perhaps over several attempts, it pries and extracts its prize. Sir Reginald, who had silently re-entered the study, listened with a growing look of incredulity, his jaw slackening as Holmes's explanation unfolded. He stared from Holmes to the cabinet, then back again, the absurdity of the solution battling with the undeniable logic of the deductions. A bird, Holmes, he finally managed, his voice a bewildered croak. You mean to tell me a common rook stole my Star of the South? A common rook, Sir Reginald, Holmes confirmed, a wry smile touching his lips, but an uncommonly clever one, with an uncommonly keen eye for opportunity. The lack of human footprints, the undisturbed dust, the locked door, the barred windows, all speak to the absence of human agency. The soot, the feathers, the minute scratches on the ceiling, perhaps the bird's initial disoriented attempts to fly upwards in the dark study, and this crucial flaw in the cabinet, they all point to our feathered culprit. The impossible crime, Sir Reginald, was merely an act of nature, however extraordinary. Holmes walked to the window, gazing out at the dense woods surrounding the manor. Now, Sir Reginald, we must broaden our search. Rooks, as you know, are communal birds. They build their nests, often quite elaborate affairs, in the tallest, most ancient trees. Our Star of the South will not be found in a pawn shop or a jeweller's vault. It will be among the twigs and shiny baubles of a rook's treasure hoard. I suggest you instruct your estate manager to organize a thorough search of the manor grounds, with particular emphasis on the dense woods and the oldest oaks. Our jewel, I dare say, is merely awaiting its recovery, nestled securely within its Avian vault. Chapter 7: The Rook's Treasure. The next few hours at Ashworth Manor were spent in an unusual and rather frantic enterprise. Mr. Finch, still visibly bewildered by Holmes's unorthodox theory, nevertheless obeyed Sir Reginald's earnest command. A small party of estate workers, guided by Holmes's precise instructions, fanned out into the ancient woods that ringed the manor, their gazes directed upwards towards the skeletal branches of the gnarled oaks and beeches. It was a search unlike any they had ever undertaken, not for a human thief, but for an avian collector of glittering curiosities. The afternoon wore on, the muted sunlight fading into the grey twilight. Just as the chill of evening began to set in, a distant shout echoed through the trees. It was young Tom, a nimble and sharp-eyed lad from the ground staff, his voice ringing with triumph. Holmes, Watson, and Sir Reginald hurried towards the sound, their anticipation palpable. Tom pointed upwards, his finger tracing the outline of a colossal, ancient oak, its boughs spreading like arthritic arms against the darkening sky. High within its uppermost branches, precariously woven into a dense tangle of twigs and mud, was a rook's nest of truly impressive proportions. It was a chaotic, untidy affair, yet it hummed with a strange, dark vitality, a testament to its industrious occupants. "There, sir! See it glinting!" Tom exclaimed, his breath misting in the cold air. And indeed, there it was. Nestled amidst discarded snail shells, a few colourful shards of broken pottery, and other shiny detritus that captivated the corvid imagination, lay that Star of the South. Its magnificent blue fire, though dulled by soot and nest material, was unmistakable, a beacon in the avian clutter. The recovery was a delicate affair. A ladder long enough to reach the lower branches was brought, and with some careful climbing from young Tom, guided by Holmes's steady voice from below, the precious jewel was carefully extracted from its peculiar resting place. As the Star of the South, encrusted with a thin layer of mud and pine needles, was reverently passed down into Sir Reginald's trembling hands, a collective sigh of relief seemed to ripple through the small gathering. Back in the warm, if still somewhat airless, study, the recovered sapphire was placed on the polished surface of the desk, its brilliance now somewhat restored by a quick, careful wipe. Sir Reginald gazed at it, first with relief, then with an almost reverent wonder at the sheer improbability of its journey. Holmes, seeing the question in his client's eyes, finally took command of the room, laying out his deductions with the clarity and precision of a master craftsman assembling an intricate mechanism. Sir Reginald, Watson, the solution, once revealed, often appears laughably simple. Our impossible locked room mystery hinged upon a series of seemingly unrelated observations. First, Mrs. Gable's scratching noises from the roof, confirmed by our inspection of the loose tiles above the study chimney. This indicated a regular ingress and egress from the chimney itself. Then, the soot and feathers we found within the flue, clear evidence of an avian presence. The chimney, as you saw, is unusually wide, allowing for easy passage. He picked up the sapphire, holding it aloft. Next, the scullery maid, Polly, a most acute observer, noted the persistent presence of a bold rook on your window ledge, even to tapping at the glass. Rooks, as I stated, are intelligent creatures, drawn to shiny objects. The Star of the South would have been an irresistible lure. Holmes then pointed to the infinitesimal gap in the display cabinet's glass panel. The critical flaw, however, was here. This minute imperfection, a manufacturing defect or the consequence of time, provided just enough purchase for a slender, intelligent beak. The rook, having gained entry to the study via the chimney, would have been attracted to the jewel. Its natural inclination to its collector would have led it to persistently probe at the barrier. With its surprisingly strong and agile beak, it would have been able to leverage this tiny gap, and with patience, extract the sapphire, mistaking it for another delightful trinket for its nest. Sir Reginald listened, utterly captivated, his initial bewilderment giving way to a profound sense of awe. "A rook," he murmured again, shaking his head. "To think all my anxieties, all the hours of frantic worry, were caused by a bird." "Indeed, Sir Reginald," Holmes replied, a faint, knowing smile playing on his lips. "The human mind, accustomed to human deceit, often overlooks the simplicity of nature's more direct machinations. There was no cunning human plot, no intricate plan of espionage. Merely a natural instinct, an opportunity, and a tiny, unseen imperfection." Overwhelmed with gratitude and relief, Sir Reginald extended his hand to Holmes. "Mr. Holmes, you have not merely solved a mystery, you have performed a miracle. My deepest thanks, and rest assured, your efforts will be amply rewarded." The Star of the South lay once more, safe and shimmering, on the desk. The impossible had been made possible, not by supernatural forces or criminal genius, but by the keen observation of a feathered creature and the even keener intellect of the man who deduced its extraordinary actions. The locked room mystery of Ashworth Manor was thus resolved, a peculiar footnote in the annals of crime, proving once again that the truth, however strange, is rarely beyond the grasp of a truly observant mind. Chapter 8: A Return to the Metropolis. The pale morning light that filtered through the leaded panes of Ashworth Manor found Holmes and myself ready for our departure. The oppressive cloud of apprehension that had hung over the old house had lifted, replaced by an air of distinct relief, almost festivity. Sir Reginald, his patrician composure entirely restored, bade us farewell with effusive gratitude, that star of the Souths once more gleaming securely in its cabinet, though perhaps now viewed with a newfound, slightly wary respect. He offered Holmes a most generous fee, which my friend accepted with his characteristic blend of nonchalance and professional dignity. As the carriage rumbled back along the winding lanes, carrying us away from the now tranquil manor and towards the distant railway station, I found myself reflecting upon the extraordinary events of the past 24 hours. My notebook lay open on my lap, my pen poised, ready to commit to paper the latest, and certainly one of the most peculiar, of my friend's triumphs. "A truly singular case, Holmes," I remarked, breaking the silence as the horse's hoofs clattered rhythmically against the gravel. "To think that all the meticulous security, the locked doors, the barred windows, the vigilant staff, could be circumvented by a mere bird. It quite beggars belief, and yet, in your exposition, it became utterly logical." Holmes, who had been gazing out at the passing Kentish landscape, a faint smile playing on his lips, turned his head slightly. "The human intellect, Watson, is prone to constructing elaborate edifices of thought. We prefer the complex conspiracy to the simple truth, the intricate machination to the accidental happenstance." Sir Reginald, for all his shrewdness, was blinded by this very inclination. He sought a human villain, a master thief, a rival for his valuable possession. He could not conceive of a motive driven by instinct alone, a theft born of curiosity and the allure of shine. "It highlights your unique genius, Holmes," I countered. "Your ability to look beyond the immediate, to consider every possibility, no matter how outlandish it may seem to the conventional mind. Who else would have considered a rook as the prime suspect?" "It is merely the application of basic principles, Watson," he replied, though a subtle warmth in his tone suggested he was not entirely displeased by my praise. "When you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth." The human element was demonstrably absent from the crime scene. Therefore, the culprit had to be something other than human. And in that environment, with those specific observations, the sounds, the feathers, the unique flaw in the cabinet, the solution presented itself with an almost inescapable clarity. He lit his pipe, the familiar aroma of shag tobacco filling the carriage, a scent that, to me, always heralded the conclusion of an adventure and the return to the comforting rhythms of our life in London. The study, Watson, was a perfect example of a phenomenon that has fascinated me for years, the intricate dance between human design and natural intrusion. The manor was built by men, secured by men, and its contents valued by men. But nature, in the form of a simple, opportunistic corvid, found the single-minute chink in that armor, a flaw overlooked by human meticulousness. It is a lesson in humility, perhaps, that sometimes the grandest schemes can be undone by the smallest of actors. As the train pulled into the bustling, smoke-filled station, the roar and clamour of London embraced us once more. The grey, sprawling metropolis, with its myriad secrets and its endless supply of human folly, beckoned. But for a brief, bewildering interlude, our pursuit had led us into the quiet, ancient woods of Kent, where a legendary jewel had been ransomed not by a criminal mastermind, but by a bold rook and its insatiable desire for glittering trifles. The most intricate webs, Holmes concluded, as we gathered our bags, his eyes gleaming with the promise of future enigmas, are often spun from the most slender threads, Watson. Come, the cab awaits. I believe Mrs. Hudson will have a warm supper prepared. And with that, he strode forward, leaving me to ponder the extraordinary truth that had once again proven stranger than any fiction.